Someone from the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I'll pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together this passage from Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. This saying of Jesus is one that has impacted me greatly over the years. Beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Jesus will go on and expound on that. But the first point that I'd like to share is, what is our response when somebody comes to us with a tale of woe because they have been unfairly treated? And I suspect that my response would be to sympathize with that person, to say the person who has wronged you is in the wrong, you're in the right. If you want to take some action, maybe do this or maybe do that. But that's not what Jesus did at all. He refused to comment on the person's situation, particularly on the brother who had not split the inheritance. Rather, he challenges the person who's bringing the accusation. For Jesus' focus was on the person, not to provide their material things, but to provide their standing before God in heaven. What the other person does is on their own head. What you do is on your head. Life is full of challenges. Nothing is fair. There's always unfairness because we're all in different circumstances. We're all interacting with different people. And so the issue is not what somebody does to me, but how I respond, what I do to them. But this is typical of the situation that we find ourselves in. And so this man said, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. The man had made the judgment himself. He just wanted someone in authority to bring it out. And so, Teacher, tell my brother. He didn't say, Teacher, what do I do? But that's the question that Jesus answered. He said, Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? Now, Jesus is the judge of all the earth. But at his first coming, before he was crowned King of the Jews, he had absolutely no authority in that society. He was not a recognized judge. He was not an arbitrator. He was simply a builder who had suspended his building operations, building with bricks and mortar, to build the kingdom of God, a kingdom that for the present time is not on this earth. And so all he could say was the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So he had no authority to tell anybody to do anything. He invites people to follow him and to learn his ways, but he does not tell. So Jesus refuses to arbitrate in the matter that the man raised, but then he addresses the person and the crowd around with these words, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Those who buy lottery tickets the only justification is some thought that if you've got lots of stuff, then your life will be in some sense better. But the statistical reality is that winning a lottery actually destroys a person's life. It completely disrupts the society in which they're part of, their friends, their relationships, their work, their sense of worth, and it is not a good idea. But a world that has no understanding of the principles of God goes after these things, because if our security is not in God, then what else do we have but our stuff, whether it's in insurance or houses or property or relationships with people. But Jesus' declaration is one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. If it did, then life would be extremely unfair, because the vast majority of people on the earth are very poor. Millions and millions of people do not have enough food to eat or adequate shelter. And yet a few people in a few countries like Australia are extremely wealthy. But do we have a better life? Do we have more peace? Jesus said the first will be last and the last first. And when we come into the kingdom, those of us from the West that make it there will find our status in the kingdom of God will tend to be very low, because we have not walked in righteousness. Well, he tells the story of a certain rich man. If you're rich, it's because of the circumstances of your life. It's not because you have made yourself rich. You may have taken opportunities. Many rich people are rich because they inherit the money. Some are rich because of decisions they made in business that worked out well, because the timing was right for that decision. But if that decision had been made at a slightly different time, the same decision would have been a disaster. Many people see the success of one person and try and duplicate it, and it doesn't work out for them. They make the same decision, but it doesn't have the same outcome. There is nothing guaranteed in this world. So a certain man who was rich, his ground produced plentifully. Well, it was the ground that produced. He was, we could say, fortunate enough to be the occupier of that land, the manager of that land, because in fact he's only a tenant there for the period of his life. But he was manager of this very productive land, and what did he do? Well, it produced so much crops, far more than he needed, that he didn't have room to store it. And so he said, I know what I'll do. I'll save it up for my future. I'll build bigger barns so that I can keep it all, and all the other stuff that I've bought as a consequence of having productive crops. And then I can take life easy. So you'll have many goods laid up for many years. A person's meaning in life is found in his work. So if he takes his ease, then he has no purpose in his life whatsoever. Just to eat, drink, and be merry. Well, that's the world's philosophy when it has no hope for the future. Just enjoy the moment. But God says, fool, tonight your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you've provided? You've accumulated all this stuff for yourself, but you're not going to be allowed to use it. It will be given to others. When God gives me riches, a small proportion of it is for my own use, but the bulk of it is to be used for the benefit of others. There are a myriad of ways of doing that, and it's not wrong to have possessions, to have a nice house, to have a nice car. It's all about the attitude and what we do with those things that we have. But Jesus says, so is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. We are meant to be channels of his blessing, and whatever he gives us, whether it is money or abilities or opportunities, we are to use them for God, not for ourselves. Because our life doesn't depend on the abundance of our possessions. He's no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose.